Jim Langford needs no introduction. He's spoken to us several times before, but this is an encore presentation, Part 1, Desoto's Expedition. Now, he's done Part 2 as well at the courthouse, in the Gold Dome Courthouse, and we had such response, and people nipping at me in the grocery store or at church or down the sidewalk. Joe, heard about that, I couldn't be there, I heard it was fantastic. When are you going to do it again? It's sort of like when we do Ladd's Mountain or we do the Cape. When are you going to do it again? When are you going to bring Jim Langford back? Well, he's back. And we're doing Part 1. He did that 3 years ago right here, and it was packed just like it is tonight. So, we have our own Indiana Jones right here in Jim Langford. We have 2 or 3 Indiana Joneses that work with EVHS, but Jim, I think, is our most known celebrity in that category. Jim earned his undergraduate degree from UGA and an MBA from Harvard. He formerly worked with Coca-Cola in Atlanta and also in the Caribbean and in Argentina. He is formerly the director of the Georgia Trust for Public Land that created a connected system of parks around the Atlanta Beltline and also many parks in the Chattahoochee Reserve. He was the executive director of the Georgia Prevention Project, which is about substance abuse, you know, the opioids and the meth and so forth, and he's been championing that for Georgia. He's president of the Million Mile Greenway, a green space advocate, and he authored the Georgia legislation to protect Native American remains and sites. He's president of the Kusawati Foundation, a Native American preservation concern, and he's also a native of Calhoun, still holding property there, but lives in Cobb County. And most importantly to us, he is a member of EVHS. Jim, you're on.
I love coming here, and part of it's because of the great food these ladies always prepare out here. But it's because you turn out, you know, you show up, and that's fun. We do have some of our Northwest Georgia Archaeology Society members here, and I have to give one update to them and to the rest of you too. And that is that our president of this group is a guy named Jack Walker, who lives over in Paulding County. And Jack has been our president for 20 years or longer. When I kind of backed out of it, I became the program chair, and Joe's been, and Jack's been the president ever since. Well, Jack was severely burned in a propane tank blow-up explosion on July the 5th. And they put him into a coma for 2 months and in a burn unit, and he came home last week down in Paulding County. I talked to him on the phone today because I told him, Jack, I got to give a report on your health to everybody. And his voice sounds strong, a lot of physical therapy he still has to go through. He's an incredibly active guy. He's got a little winery down there in Paulding County. He's on the same land. His family's been on there for 7 generations. He can do anything. I mean, and he created, this is what's great, he created in Paulding County, something you can look up on Facebook if you want to. It's called the Town of Why Not, W-Y-N-O-T, the Town of Why Not. It is a Western town. I mean, with sidewalks and hotel and bar and saloon, I mean, the work at a church, everything. And they have these shootouts, you know, down there sometime in the fall, and they'll have 1,000 people show up to watch and don't charge anybody a dime. You know, it's all for free. So they're going to do a benefit for Jack on December 14th, a barbecue and the whole thing down there. Food's free. You know, it's just a benefit if people want to give money to help out in some of his medical expenses. He had insurance, but you know what that means. You still got all the deductibles and all that other stuff, all the other costs that you've got to meet. And so we're going to come, I'll send out another note about that event on December 14th. One of the greatest people I know, and a great friend to me and to the archaeology group. And so I'm just so happy that he's going to be okay. You know, and these doctors, I went down to the burn unit in the first few days, and I could not, it was just the most horrifying thing. Of course, they had him in this coma, and it was just very upsetting. And I talked to this doctor out in the hall. He seemed really terrific. And he said, you know, we've come a long way in the past 20 years in burn technology. And he's going to be okay. He's going to be all right. I can't believe it. You know, I mean, completely burned from here up in his arms. Just a terrible, terrible thing. And it wasn't his fault. Lightning had struck a thing in his little work shed out back, and it had burned a hole in a propane tank line back there. And he didn't know it, and went in there the next morning and went back in there, and the gas was all settled down in the ground. He couldn't smell it. And ignited this, turned the stove on, and it blew him out the doors of this shed and burned him terribly. Anyway, but he's going to live to tell about it, you know, which is fantastic. But anyway, I just had to give everybody a little bit of an update on that. He's just a terrific guy. Okay, so let's get to some business here. This is about the moment after 10,000 or 12,000 years of history. I'm going to call it history, not prehistory, because the Indians, it's history, not prehistory, right? 10,000 or 12,000 years up until a moment when these Europeans arrived on this continent, and then everything changed. So you imagine 10,000, 12,000 years, everything's rocking along. Progression, yes, a lot of, we're going to see some of that, you know, how we got to where we are, where they were in 1540 when DeSoto showed up. But within 50 years of DeSoto showing up, within 50 years, 95% of those populations disappeared. 95% of the people that were here were gone. And then over the next 100 or 200 years, you begin to see among the 5% of the refugees left over, the Creeks and the Cherokees and the other people that we know that inhabited this part of the Southeast. So, you know, the point of this talk tonight is to help dispel stereotypes about a lot of things. Dispel stereotypes about who was here and how they lived and those kind of things. That's the great thing about Barry's piece, Barry's sculpture piece over here. You know, and that's why Barry spent so much detail. We want to get the details exactly right. So, I mean, every little detail, from the cloak to the pieces of shell that are on the figure here, the artifacts, the hair piece, everything about it is as accurate as we can get because of things that we found in the ground, things that we've seen there at Etowah, things that make sense in terms of the little decorations even on the skirt. You know, all of those pieces we try to make them real. That's the point of putting something like that over at Etowah Mounds, is so that you can use it as an educational exhibit for kids to say, this is what these people really looked like who were here at that time. And they weren't just people wandering around the landscape. You know, these were not nomadic people at the time period that Etowah was at. These were people living in the same villages for hundreds of years, in the same place. Very settled villages, very complex societies. So that's what tonight is also all about. Give you a little bit of a look into what that time period was about when the Spanish showed up. Think of that moment at 1540 as being like a photograph in time, because of the diary accounts, all the other things that we learned from when DeSoto came here, what the people were like. We can get a photograph, essentially, of what they were like at that moment. Then we can trace backwards in time, archaeologically. We can look at the pottery, we can look at lots of different settlement patterns. Knowing what it was like in 1540, we can then trace backwards, probably 400 or 500 years, to know exactly what it was like even that far back. And then we can trace forward in time from that moment to know how everything broke down and how we ended up with the Creeks and the Cherokees. You know, what was that all about? And then, of course, the removal of the Cherokees from here in 1839. So that's why we study that period. That's why this moment is so critical to look at. And that's what this talk is really all about. So with that introduction, what we're going to do, we're going to fly through, and I mean go fast, through about 10,000 years to get up to that moment of the 16th century, 1540. But I got to give you a little bit of background for those of you who may not know, what that was all about when that moment comes. We're going to come back to this picture in a few minutes, but this was the moment of DeSoto arriving at Coosa, at the chiefdom of Coosa, a big moment in the expedition. It was written about, talked about for centuries afterwards even of that moment. And that was the moment of looking at these Indians at their height, at the moment of their great, before the big collapse. Now I'm going to use some terminology tonight that is okay. You know, I'm going to say Native Americans, I'm going to say Native people, I'm going to say Indians, I'm going to say American Indians. All those things are fine, you know, with Indian populations. I've spent a lot of time with them in the West, in the East, helping with lots of different things. They're okay with all of that terminology as long as you're just being respectful, you know, and as long as you are helping dispel stereotypes, then okay, everything's kind of okay. My favorite quote is from Jace Weaver, Dr. Jace Weaver, who's over in Athens, head of the Native American Studies program over there. Jace grew up in Cherokee, as a Cherokee in Oklahoma, and Jace says, "I didn't know I was Native American until I went to college." So that was what I was. You know, I was either Cherokee or American Indian, you know, but I didn't know I was Native American until then. So I'll use those terms interchangeably. Just know that I'm being respectful every moment that I can. Coosawattee River, Etowah River, any river in North Georgia, any river in Southeast. That's what it looks like today, and that's what it looked like 10,000 years ago. So the geography has not changed a lot. It hasn't changed very much at all. Now, what man has done to the geography, yes, we've had some changes. But the basics are still the same. Here's another moment educational moment about stereotypes. People say, "Oh, well, yeah, I used to find arrowheads all my life out there in fields." Well, guess what? There's only one real arrowhead on this page. And I always say this to kids, you know, which one is it? It's the educational. I haven't done it with this group before, so I won't ask everybody to raise their hands again. But this starts at 10,000 BC up here, 10 or 12,000 BC, and this goes 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 AD, and then 900 AD, right there. Well, the only real arrow on this page, arrowhead, is this one right here. That little tiny one. Because they didn't start making arrows until about 900 AD. Now the rest of them are knife blades, even, you know, this one right here, of course the old timers will say, "No, that was an arrowhead, so when they wanted to shoot around the corner." How to go that way. No, that's not really what it's all about. You know, that's where it was been resharpened as a knife blade, and most of these others are also knife blades. This is probably, and this one are probably atlatl points, these little short spears. So are these two down here. You know, these little short spears with the throwing stick on the back. Again, dispelling stereotypes, you know, about what people are doing and how they're living. It's much more complex than we were taught when we were growing up. Time periods: Paleo-Indian 10,000 to 8,000 BC, Archaic, Woodland, Mississippian, all right, and then historic. We would call it historic time periods. Again, Indians would say, "Wait a minute, what do you mean historic? You know, I'm prehistoric. What do you mean prehistoric? Historic. All this is history to me. You know, as a Native American. Okay." But I may use that term prehistoric at some moment. But the point is, these are those different time periods that we study, and these are the labels that we put on them and how people were living. Paleo-Indian periods, they're chasing big animals around. Yes, fairly nomadic, chasing around these big animals. Living, we think, in somewhat settled villages, but we really don't know. We haven't seen enough of those villages. And then these Paleo-Indian fluted points, you probably have seen some of those. The big animals disappeared, and then people began to get very good at finding other resources, other food resources, and getting more settled in more settled villages, looking at different kinds of foods. That accelerated into woodland villages, where they're getting very good at exploiting food resources around them and living in the same location. If you're living right over here along this fault line that we know of right there along the expressway, right? They built Allatoona Dam on a fault line, believe it or not, and they built Carter's Dam on one too. And it's a very old one, one of the oldest ones in the world. It's about 600 million years old. It's a fault line, so it's very stable, very old. In California, you wouldn't get away with building a dam on a fault line, but here we do. If you're on that fault line, or right below it, which is really where Etowah Mounds are, they're kind of right below that fault line, you can quickly get up into the mountains, right, in the fall to take advantage of food resources, acorns and chestnuts back in those days, and gather those, you know, in a couple of hours walk. You can take advantage of fish trying to spawn up over the rapids that are right in there, because there are rocks and rapids right there where that fault line occurs, where the Etowah River cuts through that fault line. And you're taking advantage of the dumping of these alluvial soils, very rich soils, right there below that fault line too. So you're able to grow crops there. And then you can walk on out, you know, another 5 miles in the other direction and take advantage of water. So you can live in one place, and in a 20-mile radius, you can take advantage of lots of different food resources. That's why people were living at those places. That's why people were living here at Etowah, here where Etowah Mounds is. And then they continued to live there, right on through as those societies then gradually became more complex. And this is what complex societies began to look like and where they grew from. This is showing an area over here in Illinois, right on the Mississippi River, that we call, my red thing's not working, right in here, near Cahokia Mounds. You can stand on top of this mound and see downtown St. Louis 20 miles away. That's how big it is. It's huge. It's almost double the height, well, not quite, but almost double the height of Big Mound at Etowah. Well, but you got other mound groups starting to spring up in the same area, so that you can see what this says. This is 900, 950 AD. This is at about 1000 AD or so, 1100 AD. So between 1000 and 1100 AD is when you begin to get the rise of Etowah, Macon Plateau, those Etowah, Okmulgee Mounds, those kinds of things begin to happen. So you can see the influence of how those mound groups grew during those periods. These are mounds in Georgia. And so we've got Etowah here, up on the Etowah River, but you've got these others near Columbus, near Macon, near Augusta, and those are there because they're on the fall line, right? It's where the Piedmont comes down and dumps into the coastal plain. So again, you've got different food resources you can take advantage of in alluvial soils. Well, up here, Etowah has got its own little fall line because of the fault line that's in there. So those rivers are flowing that way, away from those mountains that are in that area in there. So that's why we have those occupations along those areas. The Middle Mississippian cultures, a lot of different names for those, and where their influences were. And again, this is all based on a lot of pottery things, or kind of how we identify those. So we look at those cultural types, looking at pottery and other things about them. But they're living very similarly. They're having big mounds. These mounds are ceremonial mounds. They're not burial mounds. Burial mounds were kind of earlier during the woodland period. These are mostly ceremonial in structure. We'll talk about that in a few minutes and how they get built. Big rivers are very important, like big highways. Of course, that's the Etowah River in here. You got the Oostanala, the Coosawattee, the Conasauga. These big rivers, the Chattahoochee in here. You've got these big population centers up in here. And then you got a big populations down here, way down here at Macon. Well, in between was sort of a no man's land, because these groups were in a constant state of war with each other, essentially. They knew about each other, but they wanted a lot of distance between each other. So we learned this too from the Desoto. We can see it archaeologically, because we know that there are no real big sites from a period, say 1200 AD in this area at all. There are up in here, there are way down in Macon, but nothing in the middle in here. And we know that too from the Desoto diaries. When they talk about moving from one population group to another, we can match that up and look at that archaeologically in terms of where those are. Cahokia, the one I talked about in St. Louis, near St. Louis, Missouri. You can stand on top of that mound today. It's called Monk's Mound, and see downtown St. Louis that far away. Huge structure, huge village. Now look at that. That looks like something you'd see in Mexico, right? At the same time period. It was almost identical. They weren't stone mounds. And so, we go to Mexico and we're all amazed. Oh my gosh, these cultures are so complex. Well, they're the same, just as complex as they were at Etowah. But we see them in a different light down there. They're using some exotic materials, yes. Some of those things. But they carve a lot of things in stone, and those stone things have remained and amaze us. Well, earthen mounds are pretty amazing too. They're just not as pretty, if you will, as those stone structures down in Mexico. They require more interpretation. Now, archaeologists and other folks will say, well, you kind of look at that mound as if it was something in Mexico. You got to imagine steps going up and down those mounds, which there were. There were steps carved into these places. And these were very complex societies, very hierarchical in terms of chiefs and social structures, all those things. So yes, here's Etowah Mounds. Now today, we've cut the trees down, which is a good thing, because if a tornado were to come along or a high wind and rip down one of those trees, you're going to rip out a big root ball, right? And would be damaging to the big mound. So that's why if you go over to Etowah and you've seen the trees have been removed the past 10 or 15 years, that's the reason why. And that's a good thing. It helps the long-term survival of the structures there. You probably know Mound C. Now this is Mound C is a rare burial mound for the Mississippian period. and it had a fence around it. It was a particularly important mortuary area. But the rest of these other two were ceremonial. Not just ceremonial, we know now, we've been able to see by doing some electronic work, that the top of Mound A was almost like a cul-de-sac where the royal family lived. It was a compound. And so they had little walls up there, little structures of all kinds. Royal families living up there on top of that mound. Same on top of Mound B. Don't know exactly how it related. This might have been a shaman instead. You had political structures in the village, and then you had religious structures. You also had warring structures. You had people who were part of a warring class, a warrior class in the village as well. And we know there are other smaller mounds out here in the village at Etowah. But very similar, very similar. Now, by the time DeSoto got here, people weren't using these big mounds. There was a different settlement pattern. We're going to get into that pretty quickly here. This is what those settlement patterns looked like. This is a late Mississippian period. So imagine what I call urban sprawl. We all know what urban sprawl is, right? Lots and lots of little shopping centers, right? Little retail centers that are spread out everywhere. And you got grows. Okay, same thing happened. You're in an explosion of the population. Explosion of the population at about 1500 AD, right up until the time DeSoto came. The population's going up like crazy. We run into some villages that we see up and down the river here on the Etowah, and further down on the Coosa, and even up on the Coosawhattie. They didn't have mounds. They didn't have time to build mounds. They were building villages. And okay, they had a ceremonial structure maybe in the center of that village like that, but a village is only occupied for about 15 or 20 years. Usually what happens when you're building these mounds is that you had a structure like that, and maybe it's a chief who lives there, but certainly you've got a council house and then a chief structure that might be close by. And remember, the chief that's living on top of the big mound at Mound A, that mound didn't start out that big. It started out much smaller. And you might have a new chief that comes in and they go, okay, we're going to build this new chief, we're going to boost him up a little bit, give him a new house. So, okay, everybody get to work. We're going to start hauling that dirt in here, a basket load at a time, and add another 4 or 5 feet to the mound. You do that 5 or 6 or 7 times, you end up with a mound that's 50 feet or 60 feet or 80 feet high. You might even have at some moment, like they did over in Moundville in Alabama, where somebody at one moment had the same thing going on, just like Etowah. Same kind of thing, lots of smaller mounds. And somebody at one key moment at Moundville that figured out went, okay, we're going to really take this thing to another level now. And no pun intended. We're going to make lots of different mound structures. We're going to line some of them up, with the sun, the summer solstice, those kind of things. And so you can stand on top of this big mound. You can get a line of sight down to that mound, and to that one, and to that one. And we're going to build some new ones. They did that at Moundville. Somebody made a conscious decision to really up their game over there at some moment. Was that a chief who was kind of a visionary? Don't know. But somebody got some ideas about that and put it to work, and that's what they ended up with. This is what the village looked like, though, in the 16th century. Same kind of idea. Council house, chief's house over here, principal people out here, big open area, big council grounds, if you will, that's out in here. You've got a ditch on the outside of the village, a moat, a defensive work, and you've got a series of posts. Well, okay, Etowah had that too, right? Earlier, 1200, 13, 1400 AD. So that feature, this defensive stuff, is still going on, and right up against the rivers. That's a very common way to see these villages in the way they grew. This is the little house that's been reconstructed over here at Etowah. Wattle and daub. This shows how you wove this cane together and you packed it with mud on the outside, and you had this thatch kind of roof. There's one flaw with this structure. You may know what it is? The design of the structure. Yeah.
Door's in the wrong place.
Yeah, exactly. The door's in the wrong place. The door's supposed to be on the corner of the structure. Right over here. Right on this way. And you say, well, why is that? Well, hell, it's a whole lot easier to put that door there than here, because then you got to build up and around it. You got a short wall here and short wall there. It's much more logical to put the door kind of on the corner, right? And so that's what they did. And so these houses too were semi-subterranean. The floors were, so they went down a little bit. That makes it cooler in the summer, makes it warmer in the winter. Those kind of things. So it's down in the ground a little bit. And that's really important from an archaeology point of view, because this shows a house out on the Coosa River. And this is an important village. I'm going to talk about in a second about why it's important. This was archaeology done in 1973, 74 in that village. This is one of those houses after the house burned down, and then lots of time went by. Lots of things piled up on top of that house once it burned down. Remember, the walls are nice and thick. They all piled down in that area that was 2 or 3 feet thick, down in there, in the bottom of that. Then this was a cotton field, and a soybean field, and a corn field for 100 years. And the farmers plowing along. And then one day, we began to do some archaeology out there. And as you work down, you can see the topsoil, the area that was plowed. Right below that is this house. Because of all of that material, remember the walls and this mud that's packed on those walls. When that stuff burns, that mud hardens like brick almost. We call it daub, but it's like a red chunk of red clay. And it'll have impressions of the cane in there, where the cane used to be, all those kinds of things. Well, that's protecting this floor. And you pull it all off very carefully, you got a time capsule. You've got a floor exactly the way it was the day that house burned down, with all the materials in there, just the way they were left at the moment that that fire occurred. So you've got some pots in here, a few things here. You've got a hearth in the middle here. You've got these little platforms. These are where beds were, places people slept. We know that again from the Desoto diaries. They were putting stuff under the bed too, just like we do. All kinds of little things like that. But if you take this house and you very carefully excavate it in little, 1 meter, ½ meter, back then we used to use feet, 1 foot, 2 foot squares, and you take all that stuff out very carefully and label it, right, and number it, and take it back to a laboratory and run all that dirt for every one of those little squares through screens, and you're going to end up with all these little pieces of material. It's like a forensics lab. It's like a crime scene, a 500-year-old crime scene. And what you're finding are all the little burned seeds of all the things they were eating, and all the little flakes of flint, and all the things of pottery they were making. Whatever they were doing in that house, you're going to figure it out, and you're going to figure out which side of the house they were doing it on. So you figure out all the activity areas in that house. Food being prepared over in this area, flint being knapped over in here, that kind of thing. We know that house burned down in October. Now, how do we know that? Okay. You know what honey locust pods are? You know what honey locust is? Some of you know. Big thorns on it. One of those trees with big old nasty looking thorns, and these black-brown pods in the fall. In October is when you harvest those things. And they're wonderful things. You read a candy bar label today, and they'll say natural gums on it. You're talking about some of that stuff, that's coming out of the honey locust pods. Wonderful stuff, real sweet and wonderful. They were harvesting those things, so they had those things piled up in the corner, when the house burned down. So we find all the seeds over there in a pile. So they probably had just harvested that. So it was probably about this time of year when that house, burned down. These are posts that were part of the defensive work of the house on the outside of the village. And so we core that out to look at the structure of this village and how that was all about. That same village, a very important moment happened in that village in 1973. We were looking at some materials from a publication from the 1920s. And what we found was some pictures of some things that had been found out there in that field. Now, imagine this. We know a lot about Etowah. We know about Etowah Mounds. We know about all the things that happened at Etowah and the pottery in that Mississippian period. Well, then things got a little funny with the pottery types. Not to get too technical with you. Some of the pottery starts to look different. And then, all of a sudden, it's all gone. You don't find it anymore. You don't find that pottery anymore. And then you begin to see, okay, some historic Cherokee pottery from 1800. Well, what happened? What happened to those villages? What happened to all that stuff? So we were trying to figure all that out in the 1970s. Beginning to kind of figure out some of that stuff. And I was working on that stuff. I'd been riding up and down the roads in high school, 1968, 69, 70, going to all these places and trying to find this pottery that people were talking about. And I was washing the pottery and trying to pretend like I knew what I was doing. But I didn't know any more. Our professional archaeologists didn't know any more than I did about how these pieces of pottery all fit time period wise. We knew they were unusual. Okay, then along comes a professor over at Shorter College, Pat Garrow. So you probably know Pat. He's retired up in Tennessee now. But in 1973, Pat takes some students out, and he found these pictures from these things from 1920s. And they had some of these things from these villages that I'm talking about, this time period after Etowah that we didn't understand very well. Took them out in this field where they'd found some of the pottery, and they'd come out of that book. And they put one unit down in the ground and came right down on this burial. It's one of those moments, where you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. It came down on this. Well, there are several weird things, odd things about this burial. First of all, there are 2 people in the burial. That isn't common with Native American graves. They're laid out flat, prone like that. That's not common in Native American graves. Usually people are buried in a flexed position, like you are when you're sick and you're curled up in bed, and a lot of people die like that, in a curled up position. And so they buried them that way, typically, wrapped up and respectfully, but they're usually buried that way. These were not. These were laid out. Well, that's kind of odd. And then came this guy. And this guy had a big gash up there in his head. Sharp weapon of some kind. Probably metal edged. Began to look at other things about these burials. There were wounds on the lower legs and wounds on the arms. I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but if you look at the research on European war places where you had conflict, similar kinds of wounds. Because what you typically did was you took a big halberd, it's a big battle axe kind of thing, and you knocked people's legs out from under them, and then you went over and you hit them over the head with a sword. They might put up a defensive one. So you end up with wounds on the lower legs, and wounds on the arms, and wounds on the head. Not a lot of wounds in here. And so that's what this was. Oh my gosh, what's that all about? Pretty quickly, we began to figure out, wait a minute, there's something else going on at this site. And this sword showed up very soon after that. Metal weapon, and if you look at the type of handle that's on it, the type of handle that's on that weapon, this was called a basket hilt broadsword, made in northern Italy in the late 1400s, early 1500s. Wow, well that fits the DeSoto period, doesn't it? Pretty standard issue weapon, and there it was on the same site of this site over there on the Coosa River. So it began to open up all these questions people had not asked before, had not asked since 1939. In 1939, people were asking questions about the DeSoto Expedition because there was a federal commission to figure out where did DeSoto, 400-year anniversary of DeSoto coming to the southeast, where did he go? So they had a commission. Well, the commission ended up with all kinds of sites scattered around, but they didn't match up. The archaeology wasn't as good in 1939. So they just say, oh, there's a mound site down there in southwest Georgia, we'll put that one on the list. And there's another one over here, we'll put that on the list. Okay, so you also ended up with some roadside signs, historic markers. DeSoto was here. There's one of those up in Franklin, North Carolina. And they're very protective of that sign. Well, that was one of those 1939 signs. And it was wrong. They don't want to admit that in Franklin, North Carolina. It's wrong. But it's wrong. Okay. And so what began out of this village here, and this is the village that we just looked at, where this sword was found. We call it the King's Site, about 1500. It was only occupied for about 20 years. There's a great book that Dr. David Holly, who's one of my great friends, a terrific professor, wrote about the King's Site. This is 30, 40 years of research that he put into it. National Geographic helped fund that. The Kusquati Foundation, my group, helped fund some of that work. It's a terrific book on that time period, on the 16th century time period. One of the best resources for that time period. And Dave was able to figure out some remarkable things. If you get down micro enough with the pottery and which house is here and which house is there and which house got built after that one, he figured out that the founder of the village, his first house was right here. How in the world he figured, it's remarkable how he figured out all these things and how the village then grew, again, in a short period of time. The house we were just looking at a minute ago was this house right over here, right over here, near the wall of the village. So you begin to figure all this stuff out about these villages. Technically, we know a lot now about these kind of villages. There is a drawing that some French troops made in Mississippi area, up and down the Mississippi River, about the same time period, about 1600. Walled village, just like what we just saw on the King site. See a wall all the way around here. A ditch, a protected ditch. You even got some little spaces in there where you got little guard houses, little watchtowers, all those things, crops growing inside the wall. Very, very, very similar. And that's what the villages looked like when the settlers came through. This is what Etowah looked like. We don't think they were using the big mound at Etowah anymore, or Mound B, or Mound C. Instead, they were living out there in the village. It probably wasn't the political center that it used to be. We think the political center had moved up on the Coosawattee River. I'm going to show you some of that in just a second. But it was still an important village. But they weren't using the big mounds anymore. It was a more spread out kind of way of living. So if you look at what happened with the Spanish and their expeditions into the southeast, you'll see a few things that began to happen. Ponce de Leon, 1513, touches on the Florida there. You begin to see there were two of his expeditions in there in the southeast. Then what's called the Ayllón expedition in 1526. It went up here to South Carolina area and then ended up down here on the coast of Georgia. We're not exactly sure where, but we got a couple of good ideas about that. And they got shipwrecked essentially, and some of the survivors were captured by some of the Indians and taken into the interior. So that's an interesting story. There's some wonderful stories here, and we don't have time to cover all of them. I mean, some of them are fabulous, pieces of history. That if you dig into the archives deeper, and some people have done this, more and more stories that we're learning every day. So every time, if I ever come back to talk to you again, I'm going to have more stories to tell you about new things that we found, because new things are coming up all the time, either through research in the field or research in the archives. Here's another expedition, Panfilo de Narvaez. Narvaez went all along the coast of Florida, starving to death. They got kind of shipwrecked, ended up having to eat their horses. I mean, just all kinds of terrible things. But they made it all the way to Mexico. And the things they talked about in here, about where these rivers were, all along in here, and ended up being very valuable information for later expeditions. But see, nobody's still gone into the interior. Nobody's gone into the interior. This is 1528 until Desoto, 1539. So Desoto was the first time that anybody had gone into the interior of the southeast of these Europeans. Now Desoto had been the number 2 guy on the Pizarro expedition in Peru. And that was a huge gold seeking expedition, wildly successful. DeSoto goes back to Spain and says, okay, who wants to go? I'm going on a new expedition. I'm going to this new land we've identified in here. Nobody's been in here to the interior of this new land. I think there's gold there. Who wants to sign up? Everybody wanted to go. It was oversubscribed. People taking their uncle's money, their granddaddy's money, their family, whatever they could get their hands on the money, and they're off. They want to go. So they had more people that wanted to go than they could handle. It was 625 people, with about 200 or 300 of those being military. Another large segment were private people. The church sent a few people that were the factors to count the gold, because the church wanted its cut too, right? I mean, everybody was on this expedition. They started in Havana, in Cuba. That's where they outfitted everything. Havana became kind of the jumping off place, right? Sail over from Spain, get everything organized in Havana, get some of the last minute things that you might need, horses, other kinds of supplies, and then launch off from there. And that's what they did. So they launched off into Tampa Bay area, landed there, spent a little bit of time there, made their way up to Tallahassee, where their winter headquarters was, and then deciding from there where they were going to go to try to find the gold. They ended up with a kid, a teenager of some kind, 12, 13, 14 years old, that became their translator, interpreter. But it was a brutal expedition. DeSoto's one of those guys, he came out of a class of these guys who were really terrible, brutal guys. And to take that kind of group through uncharted territory, you had to be tough. You had to manage your supplies, you had to manage expectations, you had all those crazy investors. How you going to keep them happy? And he was trying. And then you got dogs with you, because you got these big dogs, you're going to sick them on the Indians, and all kinds of terrible things. And so the book on this whole expedition, I highly recommend to you. This is Charles Hudson's book, and it's called Knights of Spain, Warriors of the Sun. I've probably read it 4 or 5 times, and I love going back and reading pieces of it all the time. I always learn something new, in here when I read this book. But it is fabulous. What he did was take essentially the 5 diaries, their 5 diary accounts of the expedition, and kind of put them together and sort things out. Some of them are not as accurate as other pieces. Some of them are wildly inaccurate. But sifting through all that, he's able to then put that together and and come up with a fantastic way of describing all the details of what's going on here. So DeSoto makes his way up through South Georgia, around the Mound Mounds, and here, right in this area, goes over to near Columbia, South Carolina, heads on into the mountains of Tennessee, North Carolina, and the minute he crosses the mountain, he keeps ever since he left Tallahassee, he's hearing about Coosa. Yeah, where's the most powerful place? Where are the most powerful people? Where's the biggest population? It's always coming back, Coosa. Where is that? Well, it's way up. You got to keep going. It's a long way. Okay. That's what he kept trying to get to, was find Coosa. When he crossed the mountains in here, he immediately then, the language changed, lots of things changed, and some emissaries showed up and said, "You're now entering the land of Coosa." Wow, okay, we're where we want to be. But you're still a few days away from the big chief, the chief of Coosa. And okay, well let's go, And so every day they would send some new emissaries to greet him. Well, these emissaries were also kind of taking account of, who is this guy? Who's this DeSoto guy? Who are all these people? And they're writing information back to the chief of Coosa. The chief of Coosa was pretty smart, sending people out there to find out what this guy's all about. So they arrive then at Coosa in that summer of 1540. And all through here, they're still not finding the gold, still not finding the things that they're looking for. This is a way that we recaptured all of the names of those villages all the way through, again, by using the translations, these different diary accounts. This is the way that Charles Hudson put this together with a guy named Marvin Smith, who's an archaeologist who was from Rome, and Chester de Prater. So those 3 guys worked at putting all this together. Me, the little 16-year-old, 17-year-old who'd been collecting pottery up here on this river right in here and trying to figure out what it all meant. I was the guy in there washing all that pottery and classifying it and learning all that. 1971, 72, 73, 74. These guys started trying to put this route together in the late 1970s, and boom, all of a sudden, all the pottery that I've been finding settling meant something. It showed the villages of Coosa, the villages that they talked about in the diaries, right there in that core of the Coosa province of where DeSoto came. And so those little pieces of pottery all of a sudden became really important for us to figure that out. So you can see the names of all these places where DeSoto came. And then, of course, came one in 1560, we'll talk about it a little later, and that's the Tristan da Luna expedition that came on in 1560, going back to some of the same places. And again, other expeditions that came after that, on up into the 1500s, 1600s, and the beginning of these Spanish missions that were all in here. I'm just trying to give you a perspective on all that. We're going to come back to the DeSoto piece in a second and what it was like in Northwest Georgia. Just to show you how these expeditions grew and why the DeSoto expedition was so important. It was the first time anybody made this kind of entry into the interior. And all that was unoccupied. The rest of these areas in Central America, the islands out here, those were all occupied and well known. But nobody had been into the interior until that moment. And that's why the populations had been left kind of untouched during that same period. So DeSoto comes down into Coosa, arrives at Coosa. I remember, been sending these emissaries out every day. And so when he got there, this is what it looked like. This was the scene. Remember, there are 5 diary accounts. And of those 5 diary accounts, some of them are, like I say, not very accurate. 2 or 3 of them are not very accurate. But every one of those diary accounts are very explicit and very almost the same about the arrival of DeSoto at Coosa. It was such a big moment, nobody could forget the details of what it was like. This is DeSoto's men here. This is a big plain out here in that valley right below the mountains of the Cohutta Range. That's the chief of Coosa right here, being carried on a litter. He is covered in white feathers. The litter is covered in white feathers. And the people who are carrying him on that litter are not lower class people of the village. They're only other principal men. Those were only the ones allowed to get close to that chief. He was being carried on a litter because his feet were not supposed to touch the ground. He was supposed to live on a mound, even though it was a small mound, the ones that we found up there, relatively small. But he was not supposed to, if he come down off that mound, he was supposed to be carried around, on a litter. This is called a Paramount Chief. Now, let me explain the political structures of these villages. In every little village, you had a chief. You might have two chiefs. You would have a white chief and a red chief. The white chief was the one who was in power most of the time. The red chief was in power whenever there was kind of a piece of warfare going on. So you turn over power to the red chief, like turning over everything to the Pentagon when you got trouble. Okay, so that's what happened. The red chief achieved power, proved himself. Sometimes there were females who were warriors, but the red chief had to prove himself or herself in battle. That's how they got to the power level that they became. The white chief was born into it. Ascribed power. And guess what? It wasn't the chief's son who was the next chief. It was the chief's sister's son. Now, why is that? Okay. Matrilineal society. In a matrilineal society, the son of a chief is not considered to be the blood relative of the chief. The chief's sister is a blood relative because they came out of the same womb. And the chief's sister's son, then, you could follow that lineage, that blood lineage, if you will, that way. The chief's son himself, well, he belonged to the wife somewhere else. He belonged in a different place with another group of family members. When you married, when a couple married, the male moved in with the female into her household, where her mother and her grandmother were, and all those people were. But he wasn't really responsible for the upbringing of those children that he had with her. Instead, he'd go over to his sister's house and help bring up her children because they were blood relatives. So that's what was going on in these villages. So the royal family, Desoto figured this out pretty quick. The royal family meant the chief's sister, the chief's niece. He kind of figured all out, okay, I get it now. The nephew, anybody in that lineage, okay, that's the royal family. And I'm going to go in there, and if I'm going to put pressure on anybody to get information, that's who I'm going to put pressure on. And I'm going to capture them. I'm going to put them in chains even. And then the people will do anything I want. And he was absolutely right. People were horrified. Imagine this chief whose feet have never touched the ground, all of a sudden being slapped into chains and told to walk. At knife point. Oh my gosh, with the niece and the sister, and oh my God, the people were they were horrified. They just laid down on the ground crying. This was every structure in their life revolved around these royal folks and this political structure. It was political structure. And here it was just being kind of dragged through the dirt. Oh, that'd be like doing that to the Queen of England, right? And that's how devastating it was to these people, upsetting to them. But that's what Desoto figured out. Boy, if I can get those people, put them in chains, those people will give me anything I want. They'll tell me anything I want. And they would. And I need 100 people to carry our luggage. Oh yeah, I need 50 women to cook and be, consorts to all these other guys, these wealthy guys that are on the expedition. I need this, I need that. You're going to give it to me. Oh my gosh. So those are the kind of things that were going on. Now when Desoto got there to Coosa, he stayed there for about a month. Because he said, okay, if I'm going to find the gold, this is going to be it, right? Everybody tells me this. Clearly, this is the most powerful person and the most powerful political structure I've seen since I've been in the Southeast. So I got to stay here for a while and see. They must be hiding this gold from me somewhere. So he would go out, send people, riders out every day. 10 miles, 15 miles, 20 miles, radius, all the way around, going up and down these villages, showing pieces of gold, showing pieces of stuff to people. Now, maybe we got some of the pearls. Well, maybe there were freshwater pearls out of the rivers. They really weren't. He wasn't finding what he needed. Stayed a while, stayed 30 days, and then said, "Okay, we're moving on." Put the royal family in chains and began to move. And the first place they came to was right here. It was right down here to Etowah. And we know that because, again, the distances and those kind of things. And this is the logical place where then he had to cross the river, had to cross the Etowah River. So, a couple of other details about that. First of all, that's the plain, that's where Desoto, again, first came and arrived at Coosa. That's the same location in 1974 73, right before they flooded this lower lake at Carter's Dam. That's the big dam up there, above up there. This is the lower re-regulation lake. Out in here is where we did all this archaeology in 1971, 72, 73, 74. And we didn't know that what we were working on was the capital of Coosa. We didn't know that. We didn't figure that out until 1980s. That's where it was. By then it's underwater. Okay. It's still preserved, but it's underwater. So, but all these other villages up and down the river there were villages that's looking down on the same location. And right out in here, that re-regulation lake. All the other villages on downriver talked about in the diaries, those are all still there. Those are the ones that I've been working on for a long time to help preserve. And I've bought some of them and, you know, try to get them in the right order and keep people from collecting and pass the new laws about looting the burials and all those things. And I've always put this picture up here to show my children that I used to have hair. And wire rim glasses and, you know, the whole bit. And I'm taking out one of those little bitty squares that I'm talking about. We took out little squares of dirt to then run those little squares through screens to figure out, you know, the floor sample of all the little things that were in that dirt at that time. And that's what that river looks like today, the Coosawhattie River. There's the site up there where DeSoto came. We call that the Little Egypt site. Not because there were mounds there, but because of the way that it flooded every spring and was very, very rich soil. And then these other sites downriver, all the way down to this junction that is right down there, coincidentally, near New Echota, which of course was Cherokee capital much later. These people were Muskogean-speaking people. That means they were not Cherokee ancestors. They were Muskogean-speaking, meaning Creek-type Indians, that later tribal group. And so these were the different villages. I bought this one to preserve. It's now owned by the Archaeological Conservancy from New Mexico. I bought this one, and I still own this one. We've done a lot of field schools, University of Georgia on this. It has a small mound on it. This one right here, the University of Georgia College of Agriculture owns. And they didn't know that they were buying an archaeological site. When they bought it to do agricultural experiments on that land. They are now getting ready to sell that property. And I'm working like crazy to try to get them to not sell it. Please keep it. So that the university can then use it for archaeological investigations and other kinds of things. When the College of Agriculture doesn't care about that, they just want some money until they can go do some other things. So I'm working on that one. I was in Athens yesterday on that one, working on that one, trying to preserve it in some way. 650 acres. Fabulous piece of property, beautiful piece of property. So anyway, I'm looking for a friendly landowner, okay, who could afford to buy 650 acres. Anyway, we can talk. And then this one down here, I own a big piece of this land next to this one to help preserve this one too. And this one is in pretty good shape out here in the middle of this field. But Spanish artifacts on all of these sites, on every one of these sites, that came from the DeSoto Expedition or the later Tristan Expedition. Some of these we can figure out what they are. This is what some of those sites look like. Beautiful farmland, very fertile land. It's the cheapest land between Chattanooga and Atlanta. We're talking about $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 an acre for some of this bottom land. And you all know that land like that, it doesn't come that cheap in Bartow County, right? So it's a little bit cheaper up there in Gordon County, thank goodness. Another one of the sites is the site that I bought and purchased in here with a major kind of a mound right in here doing some of the work. Some of the Spanish artifacts, the Spanish horseshoe. Now it's not complete, it's broken off, and perhaps the Indians broke it and then used it as a tool of some kind. Some beads. Some of these beads are clay beads. Some of these are glass beads, and with different layers of glass. And we know the time period of when those things were made because of the layers and the colors of the glass in there. And this little tiny blown glass bead right over here. The only time we've ever seen one of those is at DeSoto's headquarters in Tallahassee. A little piece of blown glass bead. So that's a pretty rare one right there. So we can match it up to these expeditions that way. So this is probably DeSoto Expedition beads. And then a cache of points. Now, you know, we talked about the arrowheads before, right? This is what real arrowheads looked like in the 16th century when the Spanish were going up against some of these Indians. These things are so fantastically made, they're so beautifully made, very delicate. And a guy who found these, it was before we passed the laws about the burials. You can't dig up burials for them. Okay, so he had gone in and found these. And the good news is he was very respectful of them, and he did a good job of getting them out. There were 120 of these in one burial. 120 of them. And I documented every one of them, measured every one of them, took pictures of all of them. And this is just one slide of some of the 120. Every one of these are so delicately made. When he handed me the box of them, they were all in kind of a little cardboard type box, and my hands were trembling because I didn't want to drop them, but they were tinkling like glass. I mean, that's how delicately made they were, beautifully made, and all different kinds of materials. We learn a lot even from the materials. Okay, these were probably laid in a grave as tribute to this person who died. Now, was that a chief? Was it a red chief, a white chief? We don't know. But some principal person was in this grave, and these were probably true. These were not all made by the same person, is my point. These were not made by a flint knapper who just, buried him with his own stuff. You can see different styles of how these were made and different materials. But look at this, out of 120, only one white one and only one red one. Now, is that because the white one was given by the white chief in tribute to this person who died, and the red one was given by a red chief who died, who was there to this person who died? We don't know. But we do know there's only one white one and only one red one out of 120. So there's something significant about that, I think. But I just want you to see the complexity of these materials. That's from up in Tennessee. This is red jasper. This is quartz, but a high grade of quartz. Lots of different materials that are in here. This one has little fossils in it. Lots and lots of different ways and different styles. Some are pointed here. Some are more ovate looking, more triangular. A lot of different things there. A lot of little subtypes of these too. They may have traded with somebody else in other geographic areas to have these. Oh, and in the same group of 120, a brass crossbow bolt. Wow. Okay, it came off of one of the Spanish expeditions. Was there a Spanish person there at the moment this guy died, and they helped lay one of their own crossbow bolts into the arrow, into the same grave? Or was this traded to an Indian, to a native person, and they put it in the grave? We don't know. But that is a crossbow bolt, the tip off of a crossbow arrow. So, again, more of this expedition work. So you see these population groups, DeSoto coming through here, these big population groups and where they were. Coosa being that population group right there on the Coosawhattie River. The one down here at Etowah, we call it Itaba, because we get the word Etowah from the word Itaba, which is what the Indians called it and what they told the Spanish. So that's why we call it Etowah. That's where the Etowah word comes from. And that, of course, was right here. So you see these clusters of sites. So on the Coosawhattie, we're about 6 or 7 villages. Down here on the Etowah, we're 6 or 7 villages. You get over on the Coosa River, there are about 6 or 7 or 8 villages. These are all little clusters of villages. So remember, you have one chief in one village, you had another chief who was over that 6 or 7 villages, and then the big Paramount Chief, the guy dressed in white and all of that, he was over all of these villages that stretched all the way from essentially Knoxville, Tennessee to Montgomery, Alabama. So this was the stretch of Coosa. How powerful Coosa was, how big it was. And remember what I said about tracing backwards in time? Okay, we think that then the original chiefdom of Coosa and the capital was down here in Etowah. Yes, Etowah was bigger, more powerful, all that stuff around 1200, 1300 AD. And at some point, that seat of power moved up here on the Coosawhattie. So that's where it was in DeSoto. So we can trace, again, backwards in time, the extent of this entire big population area and what it was all about and the political power that was there. We're at 7:24, Joe, is that right? Is that what you got?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so we're gonna quit here in about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're gonna open up for Q&A, and we gotta be out here at 8 o'clock, Joe says. So I'm gonna stay on schedule, I promise. Okay. So let me run through a few more things, and we'll open up for some Q&A. Remember the big rivers. Remember what I said, these are a big cluster of sites here on the Coosawhattie, a cluster of sites here on the Etowah, cluster of sites on the Coosa River. All of those clusters we call polities, like a political unit, a polity. So a polity of villages. And then all those polities tied together by one big chief in that same period. Another way to look at those polities and spheres of influence. And again, you had a few of them down on the Chattahoochee, but not much, because that was really the border before you got to Macon. So again, that was that no man's land that goes beyond Atlanta down in there. And then the rest would stretch further north up in there. So Etowah, we talked about Etowah. We talked about how important Etowah was. Just close to Etowah, look at this. This is the only piece of gold I've ever seen coming from this whole time period, or from any context that's pre-17, 1800. This was found on the leak site, leak bottoms, down here off the highway, just below the airport, just this side of the airport. And this was found by a University of Georgia student when we were traveling away and trying to look at one of these villages. At leak bottoms, as you know, when you cross the river there on the highway, there used to be a couple of mounds there. There's one that the highway went straight across in 1942, and another one off to the side that they took for road fill about the same time period. The good news about that is there's a whole lot more out there in that area than just what was in the mounds. There's big villages. There are villages out there. The leak bottoms in there and the village that was in there was very important in the earlier time period, around 200 AD. It was a really important site. Then it was also important, we think up around 1200, 1300 AD, was not as important when DeSoto came through, but he did come through there, and look, this piece of stuff showed up. Now, this is a student traveling along, this thing pops out of the ground, and they look at it and go, huh, well, hey, that must just be somebody's old tie class. I think I'm going to throw it away. No, wait, don't throw it away. And it's gold. It's gold laid over copper. Now, if you look at it really close, this goes around the corner over here too. It's inlaid for like a box, like a jewelry box or some sort of important box. This is copper it's laid over. This is a piece of copper that's backing those pieces there. Might have had enameling in the center of those pieces right there. And then it goes around the corner, so it's on the edge of the box. So it's even got decoration over here on this edge. So it's something like that from one of these pieces of furniture of some kind that the Spanish had with them at that moment. So we saved that one for sure. And again, kind of back to where he went. Okay, so DeSoto's down in here on the Etowah, moves further downriver, comes down in here, and then the Indians lay a terrible ambush for DeSoto down here at Mobile. That's what we call Mobile. It's where we get the word Mobile, Alabama from. But of course, Mobile, Alabama is way down here. But this was a terrible battle, a moment where the Indians had enough of this guy, and they said, "Okay, we're gonna lay in wait for him," and they did. And this is where Chief Tuscaloosa comes into play. A lot of things. We're learning more about Mobile all the time. For years, 50 years, 100 years, people have been looking for Mobile. Where was that moment? 2,000 or 3,000 Indians died that day in this terrible battle with DeSoto, from fire, from some of them hung themselves in the middle of this terrible battle around this village. DeSoto lost about 25 or 26 men, wounded another 100 or so. It was really, his expedition was already going downhill. He wasn't finding the gold. And boy, when that thing happened, all of a sudden, it took the wind out of him. It really, for the investors who were along, oh man, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for this terrible wound I just got, in the chest, that kind of stuff. And so it began to wind down after that. But Mobile, we have recently done some work trying to find Mobile. Just in the past few weeks, I was over there. So this is some of the new information I wanted to share with you about Mobile. Now, when you get down there in that part of Alabama, and I'm talking about central southern Alabama, they call that the big flat black plains of Alabama. That soil is black. It's black because of this decayed limestone that's in there. So it's a pretty rich soil. But there are no really big rivers. Now remember, when we're looking at DeSoto up in here, the big villages are all on the big rivers. The Etowah, the Coosawhatee, the Conasauqua, all these rivers. The Coosa River. All these big villages are along the rivers. Well, you get out there where Mobile is, where we think Mobile is, there aren't any big rivers. So for years, everybody was looking for Mobile thinking, well, it's got to be along one of the rivers. There's something wrong with the diaries. It's got to look for the rivers. Got to look for the rivers. Okay, well, somebody a few years ago then went in here into this area in the middle of nowhere where there are a bunch of just little creeks and that's it. And they started finding these sites, kind of scattered out, not really big ones, but just a whole bunch of little ones. And they kind of filed that away, for 20 years, 30 years. Well, now everybody's looking at it again. Wait a minute. All those villages fit. They fit the right time period. The pottery looks right. Maybe it's a different occupation pattern. Maybe it's an occupation pattern like we see over near Athens, Georgia, on the Oconee River, where, they're living on tops of hilltops. They're not in big nucleated villages, they're scattered in little bitty farmsteads, of maybe 5 or 6 or 7 houses, 3 or 4 houses across a big landscape. So that's what we begin to see down in here. And we're down there investigating that now, and sure enough, just in the past 3 weeks, found 23 new villages down there in that area. And this is the University of West Alabama, University of Alabama. I went over there and worked with them, a few weeks ago, and we all got together and kind of brainstormed this whole thing. And it's a beautiful place. Now, are we about to find Mobile? I don't know, maybe, but we're getting closer. We're zeroing in on it down in that same area. That's what it looks like out in the field. This is one of the professors from the University of West Alabama who's helping run the project, and it's really a terrific time. Oh, and there are 2 dogs looking out there, mulling it over, looking at it. The one on the left is my dog. And so, but it's a beautiful area, but it's just completely different than what we would have thought. So what I'm saying is, just when you think you got all this archaeology stuff figured out, you learned everything, boom, here comes new stuff. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. John Worth, my great friend who teaches at the University of West Florida, John did his undergraduate, master's, and PhD all in 6 years. I mean, that's how smart this guy is. And he went to Spain and translated 10,000 pages of material that nobody had seen. It's like, unbelievable. And the guy's just brilliant. And he went to the archives. Everybody said, "Nah, you're not going to find anything. All the treasure hunters have already been through the archives. You're not going to find anything new over there." Blah blah. First time he went, 10,000 pages of service records of all these different soldiers who'd been on the Desoto expeditions, about the Spanish missions on the southeastern coast of Georgia. He's rewritten the history of the Southeast. John has found since then another 20, 30,000 pages. These sheets going back. He wants to go to the archives in Havana now, and been in the archives in Mexico City, because they're documents that are still there. So my point is, all this stuff is still fresh. We're still learning it every day and learning more and more about it all the time. So, and I'm going to close it out with this one last piece about what happened after DeSoto. And that was another expedition coming from Mexico City in 1560, called the Tristan da Cunha expedition. They were going to come back to Coosa, all the way back up here to northwest Georgia. Because what they were trying to do, this was a known place here at Ochusay. This was a known place at Santa Elena. They wanted to tie those two together as Spanish kind of ports by having a place inland. They thought Coosa was halfway between those two. Well, their geography was a little off. But they did make it all the way back up to northwest Georgia. And we can talk more about that maybe during the Q&A period. I'm going to open it up for Q&A because I know you probably got some questions. And I know we got to move on. 7:33. Questions that you might have. Way back in the back.
I was just wondering, since the publication of Dr. Hudson's Knights of Spain, has the route changed any? I know he republished it in 2018. I didn't know with any new evidence if the route has been modified at all.
Not really. Now we've got new material, new things that have been found. A couple of new sites. Dennis Blanton, a great friend of mine, has been finding some things down on the Mulgee River, Altamaha River, down in that area of Georgia. As Charlie used to say, and Charlie's not alive anymore, but Charlie was a great guy, and he was pretty open. He said, okay, if you got a new site, if you got another route, something else you want to add to what we're doing here, that's great, but guess what? It's like a string that's only this long, because, DeSoto went so many places, so many times a day, computing the number of leagues that he went that day, how long is a league, all those kinds of things, then you only got a string that's this long. So you can move the string if you want to, different little places, but it's still only that long. So you better, if you move it, you gotta think about what you're going to take away from. You're going to move it away from something else to move it to another piece. So there may be some small tweaking that you end up with, at some point, but I don't think it's going to change dramatically. We're still learning things. Yes.
What can you say about the cultural changes between the time of the leak site and the Mississippian period?
Well, that's interesting. The leak site, and the classic part of the leak site, which is about 200 AD, that's another fascinating thing. You know, we used to say, well, these mounds, as cultural mounds, as cultural centers, political centers, all that mound stuff really only came on at 900, 1100 AD. No, you know, you get the leak site, and you get the big town down in Blakely, Georgia, you know, down that way, where you get some of those big mounds. All of a sudden you go, wait a minute. These people were living in big cultural centers 1,000 years earlier than Etowah. So, we got to rethink some things about that. There may not be as many of them, but there were some big ones. And we think that what was going on is that Etowah, this whole Etowah Valley, was an important source of a couple of things. One was kind of quartz crystals, you know, because you're on this fault line. Another is iron oxide, red iron, because you use it for paint. You paint yourself with it, you paint pots with it, you paint all kinds of stuff with that red oxide. And so maybe the earliest days of the leak site was a trading center for those kinds of exotic items, and that all that sprang up from there. And so that the political center of Leak actually is what became the site of Etowah. Etowah they just moved upriver a little bit from there. So I hope that explains a little bit of that. Yeah, Barry.
Jim, where did they get the copper? You know, we worked
Yes.
with copper plates
Yes.
relative to this thing.
Copper is fun to play with because you can trace exactly where it comes from. And you do that through bombarding that copper with beta radiation, with beta rays and gamma rays. And what you get back off of that is you get a spectrum of analysis of trace elements in that copper. And so we began to do that in the early 1970s. It's the first time I saw it experimented with. And we found some copper up near Chattanooga, Tennessee. If it has, bottom line, if it has little traces of silver in it, it probably came from Ducktown, Tennessee, right there on the Tennessee-Georgia border, right up in that area. If it's got traces of arsenic in it, it comes from Michigan, up in that area, because that's where they're mining. That's just the fact of geology, where some of those things come from. So we can trace this. We're getting better at tracing even pottery now. You know, looking at pieces of pottery and the trace elements of things in pottery to figure out where those are coming from too. Yes.
What's the modern day locations of both the King location on the Coosa
Right.
and Mobilla? What's the names of the areas that we know them as today?
Okay, well, the King site today, we still call it the King site. It's in a big bend of the Coosa River called Foster's Bend. And way out there, you know, west of Rome, about 15, 20 miles, 18, 20 miles out there. That's it. And the reason we call it King was Jack King was the guy who owned the property at that time. Avila, well, this is really weird, but it's down near a little town called Uniontown in Fawnsdale, Alabama. And the property that it may end up on, or very close to, is the property of the guy who's head of the Atlanta History Center. True, his family owns that property down there. And he kept talking, he's not an archaeologist, but he's a very funny guy. I think we got Mobilla down there. All right, I'm looking at this paper. And I went, yeah. Well, we all get to go down there. Sure enough, you know, here are all these sites popping up on his property, on his land down there. So, you know, just weird. Truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, right? Well, you couldn't plan it out any better than that. So he's the one who's pulled together a lot of great people to look at that site now, including some videographers and stuff, folks. Yes.
I fly over the area that you described as Coosa.
Right.
And I went through your series at the
Courthouse. Right.
And I was trying to figure out where it actually laid today. You
Right.
say it's the lower part of the dam or the water?
Yes, the re-regulation dam.
Re-regulation?
Right. Under that
And
little
how
lake.
far out did the village go, say, following the river?
Well, up against the river. These villages were all up against the river. So it was almost like the river was their backbone port to the river, like Savannah would be. So the village is sitting right there on the river, and then you got defensive work kind of in a horseshoe shape, anchored on the river and going out that way. So that's how these villages sat, almost all of them. So they might have had houses built right up to the edge of right down into the river almost.
Did Desoto follow the river, or was he also on land?
He was following the villages and the trails. That's a good question. You know, DeSoto had 600 pigs with him. That was the emergency food supply. That's where all the pigs came from in the southeast. Seriously, that's where all the wild pigs came from originally. in the southeast that came from there. Oh, and guess what? The word barbecue comes from barbacoa, which was what the Indians called the little grate where they were cooking stuff. So that's where our word barbecue comes from, and cooking the pigs. But they were following these trails. These trails were not, he was not hacking his way through the jungle, okay? These were, I'm serious, these were big trails, wide trails.
Indian trails.
Yes, and they were as big as a highway today, you know, just because you get people up and down those trails all the time. Hang on, I'll get to you in 1 second. That's this guy, yeah.
We recently were in Peru
Yeah.
and Ecuador about Pizarro,
All right,
and you talked about the extermination of these indigenous people. It was probably due a lot to smallpox, wasn't it?
that was later. The earlier diseases were simpler. Mumps, measles, chickenpox, flu.
Okay.
All right, flu could wipe out 2 or 3% of the population just in one epidemic. And these weren't massive epidemics. Well, 2% of the population is pretty big. But you know, the point is, you get an epidemic one year and it knocks you down 1% or 2%. You get another year down 1% or 2%. Infant mortality rates are starting to go up. Birth rates are starting to go down. Your food systems are getting all screwed up. Political systems are getting all messed up. That's what my other talk is about. You know, what I call the apocalypse. And it was just like an apocalypse. You know, when you have all those stories and short stories and movies about an apocalypse, that's what it was like. You know, you're starving to death. You're trying to find friends. You're trying to find food. You know, you're trying to do whatever you can to survive. And that's what that, and so it just kept winding down. Smallpox came in the 1700s, like much later. So you had some smallpox epidemics. Dane.
Yeah. What was the significance of the Thompson site and the whole polity?
He's asking about a particular site on the Kusawati. I said it's one of the ones that I own. It's about halfway between Carter's Dam and New Echota, about halfway down. And it was, we think that in these villages, in these groups of 6 or 7 villages, these polities, that there were 2 political and religious centers among those 6 or 7. And so, and we always paired towns, you almost call that. And you can see that too in the Cherokee Creek. So we think the big town was there at Carter's Lake, in the Re-regulation Lake, and the second town was at the Thompson site about halfway down, which was the village that I bought to use for research purposes, and there was a mound there, a small mound there. The only place on the river where there's another mound from that same period. Yeah.
I noticed that the villages had high walls. Who were they having the walls for to protect against?
Good question. From little raiding groups of other competing Indian groups. You know, you didn't have mass invasions, you know, of one population on another. It didn't quite work that way. You might have little raiding parties, you know, where one group's kind of upset. They're going to try to prove themselves. They got some little grievance against somebody, and like a little road rage, you know, and I'm going to go get that guy. And so, you know, they have a little attack, you know, prove yourself, come back. Okay. And so, but you had an order of things that kind of balanced out, you know, in that way. I'll give you one anecdote about that. Tristan Luna Expedition, 1560, 20 years later. We're already seeing the breakdown start to happen. The villages are small. Spanish come back. Some of these Spanish were on this previous expedition with Desoto. Some of the people that Desoto kidnapped from Coosa are coming back, acting as interpreters and guides. They get back. The villages are a little smaller. Weeds are growing up. The fields aren't as big. You know, they're all going, wait a minute, what's happening here? Just in 20 years, you know, these changes as a result of that. And they said to these troops who came back, they said, okay, we gave you food to help you out. We need your help going up against some of our, some big group called the Napoches, and they're not paying their tribute to us the way they're supposed to. You know, you got all these little political groups, and so things get a little fractured sometimes. And this was a rival group, and we think we're up near Chattanooga, Tennessee. Well, they're not paying their tribute, and we need you to help us go up there and teach them a little lesson. And these Spanish guys went, okay, all right, we'll help you out. And so, and the priest is going along going, wait a minute, I'm going to get out in front of this because I don't know what's going to happen. Well, they start getting ready to go. And first of all, they gather up everything, get ready to move. And here's the chief. And remember, before he wasn't supposed to, feet weren't supposed to touch the ground. So somebody had him on their back instead of on a nice white litter. So it's like piggyback. They're carrying him on piggyback. You know, and so they go about another few miles, and he has to get on somebody else's back. Another few miles, and they just get on somebody else. And finally, they say, you got to walk. You know, so the guy has to walk. The chief has to walk. I mean, so you just these little breakdowns. But they're going up to teach these Napoches a lesson. And they go up there, and I'm shortening the story, they capture one or two of them. A little thing happens where they're really going to beat up on them, and the priest steps in and creates a negotiated settlement. No, don't kill everybody, it's okay. Let's just settle this out. And so the settlement is really fascinating. They wanted this tribute to be paid to the chief at Coosa. Okay, well, what was the tribute? You'd think, well, it was bushels and bushels of corn. No, it was specialty items. Things he couldn't get at his local grocery store. Exotic nuts and fruits, things that were from further away. It's fantastic, information that we get out of these accounts that give us a real picture of what life was really like. Got a question back there?
I think the last time you were here, you talked about some evidence that you had, or that you had published a paper on. I was wondering, in regards to Spanish missionary activities.
Yes.
And I didn't know if there had been anything else on that recently.
Well, not much, and I know we're winding. We only got 14 minutes, so I'm going to... We have to completely out of here at 8 o'clock. We need to make the head of the library a member of this society. Okay. This is the copper plate we were talking about, an engraved piece of copper that showed the announcement of the birth of Christ to Mary. This was found up there on the Coosawattee River. This is an Aztec clothing style showing this announcement. This is the angel Gabriel with a flower presenting it to Mary. This is the ox, Luke, represented as Luke. That's where the story of the Annunciation is told. Fabulous artifact. We don't have time to tell the whole story tonight. But that is, some people call this the most important artifact ever found in Georgia. Made in Mexico City by an Aztec Indian with Christian religious training, trained about the Gospels. This was made into a Bible cover of a book. These were nailed, so it was nailed onto the cover. It's about this big. Then given to a local child, about 13 years old, and it was buried in the hand of that child. So this is a remarkable piece, and this is what it kind of looks like up close. This is from 16th century accounts as well, so we know those things. Okay, so we're winding down. This shows the breakdown of these societies over time after all this period. Everything got shattered, everything got messed up. From 1700 to 1735, we end up with the Cherokees coming from North Carolina and Tennessee in the 1700s and moving into this same area that was then abandoned after the big population collapses. So that's the end of that story, and we'll pick up with the DeLuna story perhaps at another time. Thank you for letting me come.